Nvidia coming out with some new product and tech announcements at Computex. It's a big expo in Taiwan. Their CEO Jensen Huang provided a keynote speech. He made remarks on the company's next era in AI infrastructure.
$300 million chip industry to a data center opportunity that represents about $1 trillion to now an AI factory, an AI infrastructure industry that will be measured in trillions of dollars. And this is the exciting future that we're undertaking.
For more on what's ahead for the chipmaker and others that it's working with, Bernstein Managing Director and Senior Analyst, friend of the show, Stacy Rasgon is back with us. And Stacy, Jensen Huang is known for making grand statements, right? So far, it's worked out pretty well for him. But as we try to tease out from that keynote, what is most important for the company and for shareholders, what stands out to you?
I mean, look, so you're right. He does make sort of grand statements on the opportunity in front of him. And so far, his track record on that's pretty darn good, right? So I think, at a high level, that continued confidence, and the idea that they're kind of on this path towards something even greater than what they are, I think for the long-term investor is very important. There were some very interesting, like nearer-term announcements as well. There were a bunch of products and everything. I mean, fine, but I thought the most interesting thing was that they are opening up what they call their NVLink technology to third parties. They're kind of NVLink is like a high-speed interconnect that allows them to connect many GPUs together. And so far that's been proprietary to Nvidia. And so they are partnering with a number of the AI ASIC vendors, Marvell and MediaTek and Allchip, as well as some of the CPU vendors, some new ones like Fujitsu and Qualcomm, to now make this available for third parties to further sort of grow their ecosystem into other parts of the market where they're currently not. I mean, they right now are sort of actively competing with them. They're going to try to go. So I thought that was very interesting. It's not something that at least that I had expected them to do. But that's what they're doing. So that was one of the more interesting announcements that I saw.
And that idea, Stacy, of opening up the ecosystem to other chip makers. Why do you think they made that decision? An announcement now, one, and then the partners they announced, Stacy. So Marvell, MediaTek. I'm curious to get your take on those partners, but also your take on who we didn't hear about.
Yeah, no, you bet. And so they sort of kind of announced it a little bit before. They announced something with MediaTek at GTC that sort of implied some of this, and so this gave us a little more concrete details on what they're doing. Yeah, look, I mean, so they are partnering with other ASIC vendors, again, like a Marvell or an Allchip or even a MediaTek that make AI ASICs for other players. Look, I think in some sense it probably is an acknowledgement that the ASIC opportunity is real. And look, I figure like if folks are doing ASICs, they're going to do them anyways. Like you might as well try to extend your ecosystem into that and make them partners as much as you can. So I think that's fine. You asked like who was not in it though. It is interesting. Intel and AMD and even Broadcom. So they actually have a competing interconnect standard. It's called UALink. I think it stands for Universal Accelerator Link, I think. But it's like an open source competitor to this NVLink interconnect technology that they've been trying to build. And so in some sense, this is encouraging other players not to go down that route, but rather to partner with NVIDIA on that interconnect technology. I could also imagine that those other guys, Intel and AMD and Broadcom, probably be less interested potentially in partnering with NVIDIA, and they're clearly not. They're going to go try to do their own thing. But you are sort of setting up a couple of different paths, and you already have one. I mean, the NVIDIA ecosystem is already pretty well established. To the extent that Jensen can help to drive that into some of those other areas, it puts a lot of pressure potentially on some of the up and coming ecosystems. It's always hard to get new ecosystems kind of like traction to get them started anyways. So this probably makes it harder.
Well, one of the other interesting partnerships that they announced that NVIDIA talked about, or I guess Qualcomm talked about, is with Qualcomm. Because Qualcomm is now going to make custom CPUs that will work with NVIDIA's GPUs, as I understand it. And I was reading a recent note of yours where you talked about that you're what feels like a lonely bull on Qualcomm. So I was wondering first your reaction to this news and then how it feeds into that thesis on Qualcomm.
Yeah, you bet. So last week there was a lot of announcements that came out of the Middle East. And Qualcomm even there had announced a partnership in the Middle East, I think with Saudi Arabia, to make chips effectively for AI data centers. And I would say as of last week, it was a little bit unclear how that was going to work. So they were going to do CPUs and then what? Like, so at least now we have a better idea of probably what those plans are. They will presumably be data centers with NVIDIA GPUs, and then the GPUs have CPUs that go along with them. They will be Qualcomm CPUs, and now it's clearer how those CPUs will actually work with the NVIDIA GPU. So I think it makes that entire opportunity for Qualcomm at least more credible. I think more broadly, look, people have not. Qualcomm's been tough. It's been a smartphone story. Investors have been kind of hesitant to play smartphone stories. They have an Apple headwind, which is very well known, but Apple is starting to do their own chips and designing them out, and so it kind of limits the headline EPS growth for a while. At the same time, there is a real diversification story, and Qualcomm's talked about this pretty extensively across auto and IoT and other things, that makes them less dependent on handsets over time. And there's an AI edge story, which I think they are a beneficiary, but this makes the overall like AI story for Qualcomm better, I think, and it's clearly not getting any kind of AI multiple. The stock right now is about 12 times earnings, even though I took all of Apple out, maybe it's 14 times earnings. But it makes that diversification story, I think, even more credible than it was. So I think it's good.
Stacy, final question. Spinning ahead, Nvidia earnings on tap next week, the 28th. Stacy, what are some of the questions top of mind for you on that print?
Yeah, there's some near-term worries just because of the China bans. They were banned from selling this H20 part in China, which is meaningful. I think I saw an article just today that said Jensen had kind of sized it, potentially $15 billion, and that's kind of in line with what we had thought. And I think they're supposedly trying to work around some of the new constraints, and so it's very possible that some of that revenue comes back. But I mean, does it impact in Q2? It very clearly might. I don't think that'd be a shock at this point. I think that's anticipated. But I think some of the noise around China near term is certainly a concern, and a question. I think there's also some of the supply chain stuff. This Blackwell transition has been challenging. It does look like they're in production. Jensen made some comments on that last night. But the ramp of Blackwell, like into the end of the year and into next year, I think will be a question. And then clearly, as this stuff from the Middle East and maybe from other places starts to ramp over the next several years, like how can that contribute? Investors have been worried that 2025 could be a local peak for CapEx. And I would say the only ones that have really been worried about that are investors. Like the companies that are actually spending the money don't seem to be worried. CapEx budgets have actually been going up, not down. But to the extent that investors can get confident there's still more growth to be had as we go forward, I think that's for the long-term thesis. I think that's what's most important.
We are going to be tracking those earnings so closely, and we're going to use all of those points to evaluate them. Stacy, thank you. Appreciate it.
You bet.